Hello and welcome back to the ROI channel, the channel that's obsessed with the art and science of return on investment. And today we have a story for you. Speaking of ROI, we're going to tell you how one of the greatest laundromats in history occurred, where a couple of guys were able to play both sides of politics and make absolute bank. And if that wasn't enough, they basically bankrupted an entire nation in terms of their profit. My guest today is none other than the famous Bowtied Mara. Bowtied Mara, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure.
Again.
And this round 4, you and I tend to talk quite a bit, but today we are going to be talking about one topic, one story exclusively, which you can find on Substack here. So Bowtied Mara Substack. And we are talking about the laundromat of the century. YPF, for those of you who don't know, state-run energy company of Argentina, has a very checkered history. And we're going to talk you through from start to finish how this company was privatized, then expropriated, and then a couple of guys made a few pesos in the exchange. So, mates, we're going to dive right into it. Disclaimer, guys, nothing we say here is advice, especially when it comes to money laundering. We are two guys that like to speculate on the world and give some opinions. Everything we talk about is our opinions today. And so with that, we are going to jump straight into it. The 1990s in Argentina, under the government of Carlos Menem, the first YPF privatization occurred. But a very important character in Argentine political history is Nestor Kirchner. And at the time, he was governor of Santa Fe. We're going to go to 1992. Mara, do you want to talk us through how this situation came about? What happened in 1992? And what was the involvement of this fellow right here, Nestor Kirchner?
Yeah, so basically at that time, Nestor, he was the governor of Santa Cruz province in the south. And during this time in the 90s, this was also the time of the 90s peg, the one-on-one with the dollar. During this time, it was a very liberal time in terms of economic policies, and basically what Menem was pushing through with his presidencies was privatizing as much as possible. So the thing is, like, you know, many of those companies also landed in the hands of friends, you know, at pennies on the dollar, etc. You know, what you usually see in many countries where that doesn't really go checked. You know, what happened in Russia also. So
that's actually a good point. So before the 90s, we had, I guess, the 70s and 80s dictatorship, and most of the big companies in Argentina were nationalized. They were controlled by the state. And now we're coming into the 90s. Menem's elected, and he's trying to get to more of a liberal free market economy. And by doing that, the idea was to privatize most of these companies that had been under state control.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what happened in the 90s was that. So many companies like YPF, a lot of state-owned banks, etc., they all went private, and there were, you know, small groups of people that started buying up all these companies, etc. But here in 92, there's one important payment from the national government to Santa Cruz for royalties, oil and gas royalties. They gave that to a lot of provinces, but Santa Cruz got like a decent chunk, around $600 plus million. And what Nestor did with that money was park it outside of Argentina because he was already seeing some smoke on the horizon in terms of the dollar peg, probably. So he thought, like, you know, my money is safer out offshore. And, you know, of course he was right. And he even admitted that, you know, in a later interview, that's the photo there. So he stashed that money away in, I think, between the US and Switzerland.
So how did, question, so he was the governor of Santa Fe at the time, right? So how was it his decision to? So these royalties were owed to the province of Santa Cruz. How did he get the decision to take those royalties and place it in a bank account outside the country?
Well, that is also where Grupo Peterson comes in, because the Santa Cruz bank, which also managed the funds for the province, was also privatized in the same time. And Grupo Peterson got into that privatization. They took over that bank. So technically, they were also managing these funds, and they were, able to offshore those. But in Argentina, if you're like high up enough, basically the governor is going to say what's going to happen to that money. So it's not like he basically had final say on these issues. And that's why, in that article there, he tengo la plata fuera, like I have my money stashed outside.
Right.
That's basically him saying, that was my decision, and that's why I parked it, outside of Argentina.
Okay, so he made the decision. All right, this money's owed to the province, but we're not going to keep it in the country. We're going to keep it outside for safekeeping.
Yeah,
and that's 630 million kept offshore. Okay, so then we come down, and Nestor himself buys 5% of YPF, or he does it on behalf of the province?
That's on behalf of the province. But this is just like a short-term, intermediate trade. This is not like the main story, but I just thought it was nice. Like he is like a good trader because
clearly,
he made some good money off that for the province. So that was just one trade. After it went private, of course it was worth a lot more. So that was a quick flip.
So he buys some shares at $19, and then in 6 years later, when the finalization of the privatization occurs, he sells them for $44 a share. So that's a decent ROI. If Nestor were alive today, I'd get him on the channel for an interview. That's
so definitely they know their stuff in terms of ROI.
No doubt. Okay, so we've got money's held offshore in the Swiss bank account. Then I suppose the legal proceedings are occurring, and I'm sure it's a long and arduous process to privatize a company like that. So out of that 630 million, we've got in 2020 only a little more of 9,000 remained.
Yes.
Is that a typo?
No, that is not a typo. That is 9K USD that is remaining. And nobody really knows what happens to the rest of the funds. And I triple checked this in a lot of different news articles, and basically every single outlet was running the same stories around where the funds. And Alicia Kirchner, who is his sister, she was running the province at that time.
Okay.
And she couldn't really explain what happened to the funds. So that was just like interesting, and especially interesting if we see the rest of the article, because otherwise you could think, well, maybe they used it for infrastructure, but they would have to show that flow of money, and that flow of money is just not there. So
that is a large sum of money, and that in the 90s would have created quite a lot of infrastructure that is conspicuously absent in Argentina.
Yes.
Wow. However, this is just a sideshow for the real story. So by all means, sir, please continue. We come to 1999, where the Repsol Group comes in and secures the privatization of YPF. Take it away. What happened?
Yes. So basically, Repsol now owns the majority of the company. There's some other shareholders still, and the state and provinces of Argentina own less than 1%. But as you can see there in that little pie chart there's a Grupo Peterson that is showing up with 25% of the shares. And this is where the story gets interesting, because this is a local investment group, and these people are mainly, the group is mainly run by the Eskenazi family, and the Eskenazi family is very close to Kirchner. Kirchner also allowed them to take over the Santa Cruz Bank for a very low amount. So with that, they could also manage those funds for the province. And they also bought 25% of YPF. But now, how did they buy this? That's the interesting part of the story, because this is seriously nuts. Basically, the Eskenazis, the guy's still alive, by the way. He's almost 100 years old.
Really?
The old chap. He was born in 25. He's really one of these guys that just buys up every single thing, and he's always at the right spot at the right time. And he was, big buddies with a lot of people in the Menem government, so he just went all in with those privatizations. He ended up with 4 big provincial banks, including that bank in Santa Cruz.
Yes. Yes, that's
And
crazy.
as you can see there in that little screenshot of their website, like the main bank photo for the hero photo is the Banco Santa Cruz building there. I guess that's
So
like
this is the provincial bank that handles a
yes,
lot of the provincial funds, I presume. So this guy
yes,
comes in,
exactly.
he buys construction company in the 80s, and he uses that to then buy more things as they're being privatized by the state of Argentina. And so in addition to just a couple of provincial banks, he buys this big one, Banco Santa Cruz, which
Yeah.
happens to be the same province that Néstor Kirchner was governing, and who, I guess these two, Kirchner decided to take that 630 million and park it offshore, and these guys were in charge of the bank that was managing that.
Yes, exactly. So they managed that flow of funds through the Santa Cruz Bank at that time when Nestor made that decision.
Okay. So, all right, they've got their hands in the pie with the banking
Yeah.
administration. They're good mates with the buddy, with the governor of the province. That's all. We can all see that. How do they end up buying 25% of the nation's, I guess, jewel of the crown?
Yeah, so they basically did not. They only put down like 100+ million of their own money, and the rest is all borrowed. Now, where did they get that kind of financing to buy basically what's a little over $2 billion that they invested for that? Where did they get the financing for that, and then the backing? What was backing that capital? And basically, what you see is that Repsol sold part of the shares, and then afterwards they got another loan by Credit Suisse and all these other private banks for 1.6 billion, and nobody knows what was backing that. They created 2 Spanish entities that received those loans. And it is very likely that the Santa Cruz funds were used as, either a backing or part of, the loans as well.
You would one would have to imagine. I mean, you go to a bank and say, look, I want to make a $1.685 billion purchase, and I only want to put up about 100 million. That's a decent loan to value ratio. Even in Australia, I don't think you could leverage things that much.
Yeah, exactly. And then they made one really, really good deal with Repsol. It was basically, you can lend us that money and we'll pay it back with future dividends out of the company. So basically, they wouldn't be paying anything. It would just be free.
Exactly. So these shares, were they previously owned by Repsol, and this was kind of like a vendor finance agreement between the two parties, or whose shares did Grupo Pedersen actually buy?
So that Repsol, the part of the Repsol loan, that was definitely Repsol's to sell. The other part, I'm not 100% sure if that was also already in Repsol's. Yeah, that was in Repsol's. Yeah, because they made the first purchase, I believe, in 2008, and then the other one in 2010, in 2011. Yeah. That at that time, that was definitely Repsol, and this was all with the because it didn't just happen. This Repsol was the owner from '99 to 2008, like almost the full owner, and then around 2008, Grupo Petersen came in and started buying. And that was all brought to Argentina under the narrative of, we're going to Argentinize the company again. So it's a little bit more Argentine. The Grupo Petersen is part of this Argentinización of the company. And so, it's an Argentine company, but they created two Spanish companies to do this, but whatever. So that was the narrative. They were able to buy 25% under, very shady circumstances in terms of nobody really knows what was behind the backing for those loans. And then, in 2011, they rounded it up to 25%. So that's where it ends with them buying their part of that 25%.
Okay, and the loan payments were, as we mentioned, financed from the future dividend stream of YPF. So it doesn't stretch the imagination too much to figure that these guys in charge are going to maximize the dividend payout ratios, like basically just gut the company, not invest in any future capex, just whatever the company makes, dish it out in dividends, run it into the ground, and then in the end walk away with your hands up saying, well, we made our money. Whatever happens to the company is I guess their problem.
Yeah, and that was basically what the whole narrative building up to the nationalization or renationalization of YPF was, that because basically they were gutting the company together with Repsol, and they were just paying out more in dividends than the company was actually making. So there were no new oil wells or whatever, no new exploration. That went on for like quite a few years. And then at a certain point, it was from a populist point of view, it was a very valid point that, they were making. It's like, you're just like gutting this company, you're not investing in any new development. So why shouldn't we nationalize it? The thing is like that nobody mentioned Grupo Petersen in that whole story, and they never touched
Repsol as a foreign owner copped all the blame.
Exactly.
So what was the consideration for the 25% that Grupo Petersen? Was it about 1.6 billion? And then, so I presume if we come down here, you're saying, look, 6 billion in dividends was distributed over the 4 years between 2008 and 2011. So did Grupo Petersen then just pay out the 1.68 that they'd essentially vendor financed, pay out their loans, and then kept the difference in dividends?
Exactly.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean so they definitely it was definitely a good deal for them. And as you can see, they paid out 6 billion in dividends, and the company only made 4. So they really gutted the shit out of it. Wow. Together with Repsol, of course. I mean, it was just the whole decision to have such ridiculous high dividends without it making sense.
I guess it's just a massive liquidation play on a nation's energy supply.
Yeah. So Argentina, with that, was forced to import a lot of energy, starting around 2009, 10. Whereas if they would actually invested in new energy, etc., that wouldn't have been the case. That was like the whole renationalization narrative in 2011, and then they passed the vote here that they were just going to nationalize. Repsol did, of course, sue the Argentine government, and they ended up agreeing on a payment in 2013, and they wouldn't pursue any further damages or whatsoever. So Repsol's out of the picture by 2013. But Grupo Petersen is not. Because Grupo Petersen basically decided that with Argentina renationalizing, that it was unfair, according to the bylaws of YPF, that they should have been offered, at least part of the shares, and that the Argentine state ignored that. So they decide to sue the Argentine government in New York under that pretext.
So backtrack with the privatization. Yeah. So Repsol's out, they sell their shares to the government, and they essentially waive any future rights to sue the government for that. So they've made their money, they're out. Grupo Peterson essentially got their 25% for free, plus let's call it what, 4.5-ish, $4.4 billion worth of dividends between 2008, 2011, gutted the company. Then with the nationalization, they did not lose a single share. So you can see here in these two graphics, before and after the privatization, their ownership is the same. The Argentinian government took over the shares from Repsol, but not Grupo Peterson. So they've had a 25% free airdrop, as you mentioned in the article. They've made $4.4-ish billion worth from funds that they basically, well, we believe funds they handled from the province of Santa Cruz that belonged to the state anyway.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't enough, now all of a sudden they decide to turn around and sue the new government because they just wanted more taxpayer money? Or
well, I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. They saw like, okay, our dividends are gone. Now this is another chance to make some more money. And basically in 2015, when the change of government, so Cristina is then out of the picture. Cristina was the wife of Néstor Kirchner. She was president during that time up until 2015. So she was, whatever happened with Kirchner and Grupo Peterson, she was linked in any way. She was out of the picture now. So it's not, I think, a coincidence that they decide to sue the Argentine state in 2015 when she's gone, because it's now a different government that has nothing to do with this. They have other kind of corruption scandals, but not this one. And they decide to pursue this lawsuit.
Wow, that's
So the claim there was that the company's bylaws were ignored, especially the clause that requires that whoever buys more than 50% of the share capital must make a public offer in Argentina and the US to those who already own shares or convertible securities of the company. So that never happened. They just took Repsol's shares. So legally they had some legs to stand on there, and everybody would just ignore that they basically got that 25% airdrop, and we will probably never find out who is actually owning those shares besides Grupo Peterson.
Wow, and a couple of billion in dividends over that time frame as well. And just the cherry on the cake is turning around and suing the new government, who presumably with which they have less friends than the previous government that let them do all this shit, for more money. I mean, just wow. Talk about squeezing everything out of the deal. Okay, so how did they do this? Because they didn't just sue on their own behalf. They decided to sell the litigation rights and make even more money. Talk us through how that happened. Because this is a decent ROI in itself. The fact they just sold 30% of their litigation rights for a lot of money.
Yeah, they did, for a couple million. They sold the part of the litigation rights and the future claims. Not all future claims, but part of the future claims. They sold that to Burford Capital. And their argument for that was, we don't have the means to successfully pursue this case by ourselves, so we need a partner. And I think that they have a point there, because Burford, that these are like these vulture funds that are just like really good at this.
Vultures.
So they took this case, and then they resold some of those claims, etc. Made some more money off that, and then this process took from 2015 all the way to this year, because it's the final verdict was last month. So it did take a long time, but as with many of these funds, they have patience, and once patience is rewarded, usually in these cases. So in the middle of this, the Argentine government under Macri started, they also sent a bunch of lawyers, of course, in representation, and they pointed out, like, look, this 25% of Grupo Peterson is completely fraudulent. You need to look into, how they got this percentage, etc. And the judge did call many of the representatives and did look into the shares, etc. But in the end, it wasn't important enough. The claim they made was more important than how they got the shares. So in the end, they were proven right. And now Argentina is going to have to pay a lot of money to these people at Burford just paid back on this.
So Burford, in terms of the ROI, so Burford made a few little flips and kept a piece of the litigation proceedings. So they sold then 25, they bought a certain amount of the litigation proceedings plus a straight cash payment, 15 million plus 30% of the compensation, based on whatever the outcome of the trial would be. So that's, nice. And then within a few years, they sold 25% of that interest for 106 million. I mean, that alone is a decent flip.
Yeah. It is. They basically got that part for free, which also makes it seems like, why would they sell those claims so cheaply to Burford? Yeah. It's all super shady, because it's almost ridiculous to sell that for 50 million when you could cash 20 billion on this. It's
exactly. Anyway, someone in Burford has done well out of it. So they continue to sell off some rights. Burford is going to end up with around 30. When it's all said and done, they're going to end up with about 35% of the total, compensation. And at the end of the day, have they decided on an actual figure for the compensation, or we still are using this estimate of between 7 and basically 20 billion US dollars? These vultures are going to get 35% cut of minimum 7 billion.
Yeah, and right now there's a 3 billion threshold that Argentina needs to deposit, at least for this case.
Do they even have 3 billion US dollars?
No, the foreign reserves are -7. So I mean,
okay, brackets are not good in accounting.
No, brackets, and definitely not if they're red. But maybe now I haven't seen the latest central bank balance sheet, but I'm not sure what they did with the Chinese swap, because the economy minister Massa, he went to China, and he basically got another swap from China, and it's also a couple billion, so they might be able to prop up that hole again. And I think the IMF is also going to come across with that 10 billion advance that they were requesting, because that was supposed to be due, I think, by the end of July, but they want it now, and I think they're going to get it. So
okay, so they're basically going to get some Chinese swaps, and they're going to take what will probably be a donation from the IMF to pay out this litigation, which is in part the vulture fund Burford, but in part, we suspect, those old politicians that were pulling the strings in Grupo Peterson, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. So the world essentially has just financed Argentinian politicians gutting their own country.
Yeah, exactly. It's so perverse. It's like, leeching upon leeches. It's seriously crazy. And that's why I completely understand Argentina not paying a single dime in tax. I mean, you shouldn't fund this shit.
How could you?
Yeah.
How could you?
I mean, there's some tax you can't avoid, like VAT, but all the other taxes, it's like try to do everything with as much cash as possible.
I mean, look what happens to the taxpayer. Well, international, where did the IMF get funded from?
The member countries.
Member countries, yeah. So I guess,
Yeah.
we're paying taxes, funding all this stuff too, to some
Yeah.
degree in the rest of the world.
Yeah. That's true. And
Wow.
it's very unfair because in the IMF, they always have like a European president just to make it look international, but
But it's
it's Washington basically, because they decide what happens, because most of the European countries were against funding Argentina during that Macri government with that 60 billion.
yeah.
They were
Wonder
just
why.
like, no, we're not going to do that. But then Washington still wanted to push it through, so it did happen. It was the biggest loan ever, and it's like, I think it's almost 60% of all IMF loans is Argentina. So it's like right now Argentina is too big to fail.
Yeah. And why do you think the US, what's the US interest? Is it to keep Argentina dependent on the dollar system so that the US can kind of use this as a proxy state with, maybe, who knows, like to get access to lithium reserves or energy reserves in Vaca Muerta? If you were to
Well,
speculate, what? Because I mean, if you're a
well,
creditor and you've got this
uh
deadbeat debitor, I mean, you don't keep
yeah.
lending them money, do you? Unless there's something in it for you. So what's in it
Well,
for
I
them?
think that's sort of the backdoor arguments right now that are being made. I think they're really negotiating hard on this, and that doesn't really appear in the newspapers. But there has been talks about flexing up the whole lithium industry in the north in order to open up more capital to Argentina. So it's like, if you want this advancement, then you do have to start making some concessions. And I mean, China does the same thing. I mean, they're building a port in Ushuaia. So it's always nothing is free in these kind of agreements. Now, I think it is strange that they keep funding this stuff. I mean, during Macri, I sort of think they were a little too positive, thinking that Argentina would change, because now they had like an opposition government
Hmm.
that was a little bit more liberal and in economic terms.
Yeah, because
Um,
the Macri government was based more on being a right or center right government that
yeah,
was.
yeah. And in the end, they ended up doing gradual policy, which didn't work, and basically was more of the same. The only thing they changed was opening up the dollar exchange rate. You could buy as many dollars as you wanted. And actually, that didn't explode the peso dollar rate that much. It was pretty okay. But at a certain point, in the last 2 months of his presidency, he put the cap of $200 a month on it. That was basically done with the agreement of the new government, saying like, okay, we need to do something as a transition, and then it sort of fell on Macri to do that. So during his government, they put that cap on the dollar again, and I think it was the second. No, actually, I think they never took it off, the export taxes. They just
No, and the capital
downgraded.
controls are the same, right? Like still 200
Yeah, and the
US a
capital
month
controls are
max.
the same. So in the end, it was very much of the same, but with a lot more capital, because people are just pouring in cash because they thought it would change. Um, and But a lot of that IMF loan was just pouring that on old debts, because there were like Macri finally paid off the 2001 issue where Mr. Elliott Vulture, that one, he cashed out big time on that, the Elliott fund, because he
Wow.
basically bought the 3% that was distressed of the bondholders that didn't agree with the terms that Christina set, and that was still floating around. And because that debt was still defaulted on, Argentina didn't have access to capital markets and any capital, basically. So that was the first thing that Macri did, and that was such a huge pile of cash that he paid. He paid that off with the part of the IMF money, plus a lot of additional loans, etc. So
Okay.
that was another case where the
So he
Elliott.
tried to reduce the debt level. with the
Yeah.
IMF loan, but then
Well, no, he didn't. He didn't really try to reduce the debt level, because then afterwards, of course, he indebted the country with with the IMF again.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, to pay off old debt.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but yeah, the Elliott Capital, they were really patient, because they bought that distressed stuff, I think, in 2003, and they had to wait all the way up to 2016 to see that money. So that's that's almost 15 years.
Wow, that's
But they just made a splasher on that. That was just insane, and they bought they bought that 3% for pennies on the dollar at that time. So they could weigh easily on that, and it was also, they would cash billions on that.
interesting. So in the end, when it's all said and done, today EPF is still around, still a company,
Yeah.
worth
I'm
roughly
I'm actually quite bullish on, despite all this, I'm pretty bullish on YPF and Argentina's energy landscape in general, because they are investing in a lot of new projects, and it does look like 2024, 25, Argentina will be completely energy independent.
Yeah, and if you want to read more about that, guys, Mara has an amazing article, link on the Substack again. Yeah, happening down in Vaca Muerta, right? Like that's where they're generating most of the energy.
That's the biggest oil and gas field after Venezuela. It's the biggest deposit in South America, so it's really huge. And then they also discovered offshore, 200 kilometers outside of Mar del Plata, that they're also going to drill. So yeah, there's just it's really big, and I think from the pipeline will probably be ready at the end of the year. I mean, they were planning on July, but I don't think they're going to make that. Pipeline for the north. So with that, the northern provinces do not have to buy gas from Bolivia anymore.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, any nation that's going to be energy independent or a net exporter, that's why I'm so bullish on Brazil, because, for reasons I've mentioned ad nauseum on this channel, energy export, and you see the trade surplus, in the balance of trade for countries like Brazil. They've just got this massive surplus. Who's helping EPF with all this construction?
So Chevron is helping EPF, and there's some other. I think Shell is also partially involved, and there's some other local companies as well that have started projects there. Pampa Energia is a big one, and let's see. There are like 3 or 4 other foreign companies that also have small projects there. But yeah, no, it is really, there's so much there that this is also one of the reasons why the Chinese government, for example, after one of the first swaps, that's the location for their military base. It's right next to all those oil fields in Neuquén, in Vaca Muerta. And that was because of their first swap with the Argentine government.
So that was part of the deal.
That was part of the deal. They got a military base there. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows what they do there. China says that it's for watching the stars, but basically with that base, they can capture most of the cellular data up to Paraguay, I think. And it's also, a pretty firm base on this hemisphere. But it is really strange. I mean, literally, the Argentine government doesn't know what China is doing there, and they don't have access. And they have a lease of 20 plus years on that. So yeah, they're just there.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. No. Yeah.
Wow, perhaps a topic for your next article. Who knows? So EPF, $4.4 billion market cap today. Argentina, well, the state of Argentina owns 51%, so we call it 2.2 billion. For that 51%. With all this shenanigans, they may have to pay up to 20 billion for expropriating it without making a public offer at the time. So that was that was a critical oversight, we'll call it.
Yeah, exactly.
And all this time, Grupo Pedersen plays both sides. They get 25% free thanks to public funds anyway that belonged to the province of Santa Cruz. And those funds are no longer accounted for. Wow, that's just yeah. And no one, as you said, no one knows who was behind Grupo Pedersen, who received those payments. The money's gone, and not just the taxpayer funds, but then I guess for the initial capital, the dividend payments and the compensation, at least 20 billion plus at taxpayers' expense. That is an incredible story. Is there anything close to this? Like, I know that the Petrobras scandal, there was quite a decent laundromat.
Yeah, Lava Jato, the car wash thing in Brazil. Yeah, that also included some Argentine companies, and some neighboring countries were also involved in that.
Naturally,
but I checked the stats, and it didn't amount even to 10 billion, and it was one of the biggest scandals.
Wow, this
is set up, pretty. This is done like by the pros. This is really hard to get your finger on, just because the way they set up those companies, etc. It's also been a long time, and it's probably really hard to figure out all the paper trails by now, especially now that Credit Suisse is blown up. It's no longer there. It's also very convenient.
It's now merge with UBS, right? That seems to happen all the time.
And I'm not sure, who would investigate it. I mean, during Macri's time, they did try to pinpoint on this issue, saying like, look, this 25%, this is like completely fraudulent, and
absolutely. But I guess back in the 90s, I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, the 25 they got in 2008. Of course, that initial money
was finalized
in the 90s. Yeah, that was in the 90s.
Jesus, that's a lot of money in the 90s.
Yeah, it would be not counting for inflation. It would be about 1.2 billion right now. It's almost double.
Wow.
Yeah, with adjusted for inflation. Yeah.
Wow, that's that's quite a free carry.
Yeah.
What a carry trade. Wow, that's amazing. So a wonderful story. Wonderful to hear it from the man himself, who knows all about geo arbitrage and mobilizing your assets, international diversification. Marta, anything else you want to add before we wrap up this particular topic? I'm sure we'll be back with another topic. We never, ever run out of things to talk about when it comes to Argentina.
No, and on this particular topic, maybe not. Well, maybe one small little side note is that the CEO of YPF at the time of the nationalization, he just stepped down. I think it was in 2015, and then he started a new company. And without any real investment, he stumbled upon some of the best oil wells in Vaca Muerta. Of course,
that's right. So this was Vista Energia. Yeah,
exactly.
Miguel Galucho, CEO of YPF when the nationalization occurred.
Yeah,
and then goes and starts his company. What, the next year? If he finds the company Vista Energia and then stumbles upon the best oil wells in the country,
without almost any investment of R&D or whatever, and he's able to start working on that.
Wow,
must be convenient. Yeah, it's just all very convenient. So
yeah, it's almost like he took some of that intel that he had as part of YPF and finds what essentially a private company that I guess he listed publicly. And
no, it's not even listed publicly. I mean, it's a private company. I don't think it's on the Merval. Actually, let me just check that.
Okay, so takes all the, I guess, the intellectual property that's come from the whatever R&D was occurring at the time in YPF. So this guy knows where the best oil lease sites are to drill, and then just steps down after the nationalization, starts his own private company with all that insider knowledge, and then just starts drilling up the best wells because he knows He knows where the oil is.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I'm going to be honest. I haven't seen the books for Vista Energia, but I'm reasonably sure the return on equity is going to be pretty good. If you know,
Yeah.
you don't have to spend much capex, and you can just pull oil out of the ground because you know where it is, thanks to someone else, like taxpayer funded capex. I mean,
Yeah,
wow,
exactly.
wow. Did you find
Well,
it?
it's
Is
actually
it
good.
publicly
Yeah,
listed or
yeah.
not?
No, at least I mean they do have a lot of investor information. Yeah, the thing is here, I'm trying to log into my Merval account, the local stock exchange here. But the thing is, after banking hours, you can't see any quotes there. Let me see. Maybe it'll appear.
Yeah, on the we've got a few
Try
listings.
Vista Energy. Maybe that will appear.
Nice. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. I have to say, does that seem right? Yeah, okay. So we've got the peso listed price.
Okay.
Okay, interesting. Seems to be upwards and to the right. Interesting. Okay, so we've got. Okay, so this guy now has a company that 2.1 billion US market cap. That seems a lot for an Argentine company.
Yeah, that's pretty hefty.
That's as much as the Argentinian consideration or ownership of
Yes.
YPF. Wow.
Might be future story here.
we always find a new thread. We always
Yeah.
find a new thread. So okay, yeah, it was incorporated 2017. So he has a wonderful gravy train in YPF, the national company. Starts his own company, this private Vista Energia. Starts drilling. Let's take a look. Return on assets 70.4%. You know, not bad, not bad. Wow.
Do you have an ADR or no?
I'm guessing ADR. I don't see it, but I will investigate further. There's a couple of different listings. I'm not sure what the D shares are here. Let's take a look.
D I think is dollar. So
just
otherwise it's
dollar denominated shares.
Yeah.
They're in here. Well, it says here there's a New York Stock Exchange listing, which would have to be an ADR, right? Like they wouldn't.
Yeah, that has to be an
convertibility
ADR in dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, convertibility. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Ooh. Maybe we need to set up our own portfolio tracker. You know how there's an ETF that tracks the Nancy Pelosi and Ted Cruz portfolio tracker, some of the greats. Well, I don't know. I think the RGs might be able to teach the pollies a thing or two about.
I think so. Yeah. They're amateurs.
Amateurs. Wow. So let's take a look. Here's the return on equity, which I guess doesn't account for debt on assets, but in 2022, when everyone else was really struggling. I mean, look at these. This is crazy.
This is 10x from 10x right here.
Jesus. Return on assets. Let's take a look. Yeah, there's a slight inflection there that one can see. I guess you had COVID to account for here. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, they only launched in 2019, and then it was kind of flatlined around $2.5, and now it's 23.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wonder if there's an options market. I'll have to take a look at the options on the ADR. Well, my friends, let's take this conversation offline. Guys, for those of you who are still listening, make sure you check out Bowtied Mara's Substack. Link will be in the description. You will not be bored. There's plenty of high-quality articles to read. And with that, sir, it's a pleasure as always, and I look forward to catching up with our next public conversation.
Yeah, me too. Always a pleasure.
All right, guys, take care.
Take care.